bad to go through what you go through,
Yeah.
and then you don't get no relief later. You know, you're still miserable for I don't know how long.
Well, yeah, but that's the way it goes in life.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way it goes
You're
in
lucky
life.
that you went as long as you did.
Yeah.
You're lucky.
You're not a chicken. You're 90 years old. I'm 84. I'm counting my days too, believe me.
Because the data told me, the data told me what I don't have to go through. I just said no. I said, let me know. It was torture. You'd have to go through it to know.
On June 9th, 1938, Mom gave birth to a little baby girl who Mom and Dad named Marlene June Muriel. She was the joy of their recent marriage. But joy would soon turn to sorrow. June had complications arising from her birth, and she was very frail and sickly. She suffered so much. Now I will quote Mom in her own words. It was a difficult birth. The doctor broke her collarbone while using forceps to help in the delivery. We were not told this till later. She soon developed infantigo, an infectious disease, and we were required to leave the hospital immediately, for fear that they would have to close the maternity ward if it were known. June had difficulty holding down nourishment because she apparently suffered from an interdeception of the bowel, which prevented her from keeping the nourishment, milk, required to survive and develop her frail body. Then, at 5 months, June got very sick. When she was brought to the hospital, the doctors decided that she had to be operated on right away for an interdeception of the bowel. The operation was performed at midnight. The operation lasted 2 hours, and June survived for another 5 days. She passed away on November 13th, 1938. End of quote. The only consolation June had was the comforting caresses of her mom and dad. Just as precious metals are tempered in fire and intense heat, so Mom's love for her children was tempered in sorrow. Mom suffered greatly after this tragic event. She carried in her purse a picture of June, and often grieved over the memories that this picture would invoke. Now, I will relate my side of the story. There is more to this story than what meets the eye. In fact, one would be correct in saying that it is a never-ending story. It is a story intended for this generation, but also for future generations. For me, it all began in the summer of 2003. That summer, I came home frequently to visit, as it was obvious that Mom's days were numbered. I took it upon myself to collect all the family photos from years gone by, and to load them onto my computer so that I could save them on a disk. I came across a photo of a child in a coffin. Not knowing who it was, I asked and was told it was our sister June, the firstborn of our family. I was 57 years old, and it was the first time I had heard about June. I simply didn't know that I had a sister who had died in infancy, before any of us were born. I was really surprised, and I began to inquire and investigate. My brother Alton and I decided to go visit the cemetery in Williamstown, where June had been buried. It was clear to me that Alton had never been there, because after about 20 minutes or so, I found the grave site. From that point on, I would think about June often, always wanting to know more, but I couldn't bring myself around to asking Mom about June, so as not to upset her. After all, she had never talked to me about June. Toward the end of summer, that is, September 1st, I kissed Mom goodbye for the last time in the palliative wing of the Hotel Dieu Hospital and set out for Toronto. On the way back, I had an unusual experience. It was the first of many that would follow over the years. I had not been a practicing Catholic since, 1967. I would attend Mass with Mom when visiting home, but that was about the extent of my faith. As I was saying, while driving back to Toronto on September 1st, 2003, I had an unusual experience. I was thinking about June, and all of a sudden I became quite emotional and began to pray to her spontaneously, an improvised prayer. It was unusual because I had not uttered a prayer for decades. This prayer came from my heart. It was a kind of exhortation to June to look after Mom when she got there. It was as if, out of the depth, I cried out to heaven, and heaven responded. As strange as this may sound, many unusual things happened over the next 6 months that eventually brought me back to the church. I re-entered the church in February of 2004 in a serious fashion. A number of mystical experiences followed from 2006 on. But now, I will mention the sleeping vision I had on March 10th, 2008. Mom came to me in a dream. She appeared to me in her prime, about 40-ish. It was, indeed, a strange dream. She never uttered a word as her lips did not move. It was I who spoke. It was as if she had infused thoughts into my mind, and I began to say things about June that I previously knew nothing about. In fact, it was Mom speaking through my lips. I understood from this that she wanted me to relate these words back to the family, as they would prove to be important for the salvation of each one of us. As soon as I awoke, I jumped out of bed, sat down at my desk, and wrote everything down on paper which she had infused into me. I will now read what I wrote on the morning of March the 10th, 2008. Our June, victim soul. What is a victim soul? A victim soul is one who offers his sufferings up to God so that they may be joined to Christ's sufferings for the redemption of poor souls here on earth. Many have been the victim souls throughout the centuries. For example, all of the saints and many others unknown to us. Victim souls are great gifts from heaven, given for those perishing on earth. On the morning of March 10th, 2008, I had a dream, an incredible dream. There were just two personages in my dream, myself and Mom. Mom appeared as she was in her prime. She didn't speak a word to me as I did all the talking. I began telling her that I understood why June suffered so much in her short lifespan. I explained to her that June was a victim soul sent by God according to his great plan for the salvation of man. She was placed in our midst, in our family, because God, all-knowing, knew that someday our family would suffer a crisis of faith. Just as Christ's incomparable sufferings and ignominious death on the cross would serve to redeem us, so it is that a victim soul can also intercede for us, if we ask. But we must ask. June was a precious gift sent from God that someday would serve to bring us back to the truth, away from the corruption and perversions in the world that we seem so willing to embrace. Over the 5-month period that June was with Mom and Dad, she certainly suffered, which must have seemed incomprehensible to our parents. But June would never get angry or curse God for her misfortune. No. Children cry out seeking comfort from those near them. When children are born, they are so close to God that one can only describe their spirits as being angelic or seraphic. Anger is something that is so alien to them, acquired later on, or even learnt by observing those around them. June, in her tears, sought comfort in her affliction, and she got it from our parents and also from her guardian angel. Because she was not capable of anger or cursing, her suffering was acceptable as a holocaust to God and joined to Christ. In this way, she accumulated merits in heaven, or grace if you will, not for herself, but for others to call upon in their hour of need. And when she died, being innocent and also immolated as a love offering, she flew through the gates of heaven on the wings of seraphs, the highest of the angelic spirits in the hierarchy of the choirs of angels in the kingdom of heaven. I fully understand this now. When I cried out to heaven on my trip back to Toronto on September 1st, 2003, it was as if the floodgates of heaven opened. It was a selfless act, and heaven responded. It was as if I had reached up to heaven, and heaven reached back, and the grace that June had merited during her sorrowful sojourn on earth was lavished upon me with love, and I would never be the same. It seemed to me, thinking back, so many things occurred from that point on as I was being led back to the church that I had left, so many years earlier. For one, remember my curious interest in angels? And in early February of 2004, I re-entered the church. It's been quite an incredible journey, I must say, and it is far from over. The race has just begun. As for June, we have an angel in heaven who wants nothing more than to assist us on our journey, and all you need do is ask. You see, God requires that as a prerequisite before granting graces to his children. He requires an act of love on our part from our free will. And if the request is an act of selflessness as opposed to selfishness and cannot come to any harm, he will grant it as any loving father would. There is no need for a ritual or some special disposition. Simply speak to June as you would to your best friend and watch what happens. So, you wondered why the innocent suffer? That you may be saved. No suffering goes unnoticed in heaven if it is born in humility. Instead of cursing God for the gift of suffering, praise the Lord of heaven and earth. Miracles do happen. I know. And your miracle is waiting to happen. I am convinced that June is the patron saint of our family. And what does Jesus have to say concerning victim souls? Be happy for having been called, desired by God for this function as hosts. More necessary than the elements for the continuation of human life are the sacrifices of the victim souls. Love tells it to you. Those who are the victims of the Holocaust are the legions of archangels who defeat the legions of demons and who support the world by keeping for it the mercy of God. Those who are the hosts are the truest imitators of Christ. Those who sacrifice themselves generate children to the Lord their God. That was not the end of it. Mum had inspired me to perform other tasks. Shortly after the winter thaw, I left for Cornwall so that I might visit June's gravesite again. It had been 5 years since I had been there. To my great astonishment, when I arrived at St. Mary's Cemetery in Williamstown, behold, June's marble stone was missing. It was not there. I couldn't believe my eyes. That stone had been in its place for 70 years. The day that I showed up to retrieve the stone so that I might take it home with me, to clean it up and strike the letters again so that it might be legible, the stone had gone missing. What are the odds of that happening? Something or someone urged me to search the area. I can't explain it. Call it an inner voice. I found the stone, face down on the grass, some 50 feet from June's gravesite. There was a big gash in its side. I guessed that it had been struck by the blades of a tractor mower. But I thought to myself, it must have happened quite recently. Otherwise, the stone would have been discovered and probably trashed. So, Providence was at work. I arrived not a moment too soon. My mission from heaven was to clean up the grave site and hold a small ceremony in honor of June on her 70th birthday. In fact, June 9th, 2008, June would have turned 70. All of the immediate members of the family attended the ceremony, as well as spouses. Clayton and Margaret, Colleen and Jerry, Vernon and Cynthia, Alton and Louise, Lawrence and Francoise, myself, Gary, and last but not least, Wayne with his friend Aline. After the ceremony, we all went over to Vernon's place in Cornwall for lunch. Then we all drove to Ottawa for supper at Alton's place. After supper, we all attended Mass that was said for June at 7 p.m. at St. Clement Parish in Ottawa. The Mass was the traditional Latin rite in June's honor. Many graces flowed from this Mass for those in attendance, and also for those who participated at the gravesite ceremony in Cornwall.
To